The monarch smelled of truffle oil and quiet money. My sister sat at the head of the table like a queen on her throne. My mom toasted, "She is the daughter I am proud of." Then the waiter put the $3,450 bill heavy in front of me. My sister shrieked while everyone waited. I stood up and slid it back. The whole room went silent. The amber lighting made the crystal flutes glow with a sickly warmth. My mother's smile remained frozen like cracked porcelain. Susan leaned in close. Her breath smelled of expensive merlot and high-stakes manipulation. She patted my arm with a rhythmic, patronizing touch that made my skin crawl. "Teacher salaries are stable," she whispered. "This brand launch is Lauren's big moment, and you need to support her. It is the least you can do for this family." I looked down at her hand. Her manicured nails looked like talons against my cheap blazer. I noticed she was wearing a new diamond tennis bracelet. The table held its breath, while the minor investors watched us. These local bloggers were already reaching for their phones to record the drama. Lauren started to pout. Her eyes darted around the room to ensure her audience saw her victimhood. She looked like a child, yet she was 30 years old. I felt the familiar weight of their expectations pressing against my chest. It was a physical burden I had carried for a decade. My father refused to look up from his steak. I did not scream or cry. I simply placed my fingertips on the leather folder and pushed. It hit the stem of my mother's wine glass with a sharp, crystalline clink. "I think the brand should pay for the launch," I said. My voice was steady and loud enough to reach the back of the room. The waiter stepped back into the shadows. I grabbed my purse and felt a strange lightness in my legs. My mother's face finally crumbled into a mask of pure rage. I walked past the host stand and out the heavy oak doors. The cold night air hit my face like a slap. My fiancé Jacob was right behind me. He did not ask questions. He simply opened the car door and let the engine hum to life. We drove in a silence that felt heavy and charged. I checked my phone. The first notification from my father had already arrived. It was not an apology. It was a demand for my immediate and total return. We pulled into our driveway and the apartment looked peaceful. I stared at my hands in the dim dashboard light. They were not trembling. For years, I had been the one to smooth things over and absorb the shocks. Tonight, I had handed the bill back and the sky had not fallen. I realized I was not a martyr or a savior. I was just a gambler who had finally run out of coins. My phone buzzed again. I turned it off and stepped into the dark. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the dark phone. The screen flickered with a relentless, rhythmic pulse. Every vibration felt like a tiny hammer against the wood of the nightstand. My father had sent 3 messages in 2 minutes. He said my mother was hysterical in the car. He called me petty and ruinous. They were not worried about my feelings or my finances. They only cared about the sudden disruption to their supply chain. Jacob walked in and handed me a glass of water. His face was a mask of hard lines and quiet support. I realized that my family treated me like a rigged slot machine. I kept feeding it coins and hoping for a jackpot of love. I had paid for my father's sports car and Lauren's city deposit. Every time I paid, I told myself it was the last coin. I thought this investment would finally yield respect. The machine never paid out. The blue light of my laptop illuminated the room. I opened a blank spreadsheet and labeled it the ghost ledger. I started typing dates and dollar amounts from my banking app. The numbers added up with a cold, terrifying speed. I listed the $5,000 for my father's legal fees. I recorded the $1,200 for Lauren's studio rent. My financial stagnation was finally written in black ink. I was documenting the price I paid for their conditional, shallow affection. I created a second column for the emotional debts. I recorded the missed anniversaries and the swallowed apologies. I wrote down the hours spent as a free therapist for their self-inflicted crises. This was a balance sheet of my own grief. I realized I was not just in the red. I was completely bankrupt in their eyes. Beside me, Jacob scrolled through his own phone. He suddenly froze and held the screen up to my face. "Look," he said. He zoomed in on a photo of the restaurant receipt. I had missed a small line item in my earlier rage. Private room deposit, it read. Future event hold for $1,500. The date was set for next month. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew that date. It was my mother's 30th anniversary. She told me the party was canceled because they were broke. They were using my money to book a room I wasn't invited to. I called the restaurant and used my best professional voice. I asked to confirm the details for the Tuscany room. The manager checked the system and confirmed the reservation for Susan and David. The deposit was secured using the payment from our table. My hand shook as I ended the call. They had lied to my face while reaching for my wallet. They were planning a celebration on my dime. They were building a fantasy on my silent labor. I looked at the spreadsheet and felt a strange, icy calm. This was no longer about a dinner bill or a sister's ego. It was a professional audit of a failed business venture. I began to print the pages one by one. The printer whirred in the quiet apartment. I placed the evidence in a manila folder. I knew they would come to my door soon. They wanted a submissive daughter. Instead, they were going to meet their primary creditor. The morning sun cut through the kitchen window like a scalpel. I sat at the table with the manila folder. The digital paper trail was printed and ready. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "We are downstairs." It read, "Buzz us up now. We need to settle this." I looked at Jacob. He stood by the counter with his arms crossed. He looked ready for a fight. I told him to stay in the bedroom. This was my war. I pressed the buzzer and waited for the elevator. My heart was a steady drum against my ribs. The hallway seemed to shrink when the door finally opened. My father walked in first. He filled the space with his heavy, disappointed presence. My mother followed him. She clutched her designer purse like a weapon. Lauren brought up the rear. She wore oversized sunglasses indoors to hide her fake tears. They did not take off their heavy coats. They marched into my living room like they held the deed. "Sit down," my father commanded. He did not ask. He simply expected my obedience. I sat in the armchair across from the sofa. I placed the folder on the coffee table between us. My mother sat on the edge of the cushions. Her posture was rigid and controlled. "You have lost your way, Madison," she began. "Tuesday night was a disgrace. You embarrassed your sister and disrespected your own father." Lauren sniffed and wiped a dry eye. "My investors are asking if we are broke," she added. "Do you know how hard it is to get funding now?" My father held up a hand to silence her. "We are willing to move past this," he said. "We know you are under stress. Maybe you are just jealous of Lauren. We forgive you. But you must apologize. You need to pay the bill and make this right for everyone." I looked at them. I saw the familiar mix of sternness and pity. For years, this tribunal would have terrified me. I would have been crying and begging for their understanding. But today the fear was gone. I felt the cold detachment of an auditor. They were not my family in this moment. They were just bad investments, trying to secure another round of funding. "Are you finished?" I asked. My voice was soft and very flat. "We are finished when you apologize," my mother snapped. I did not move. I just tapped my finger on the folder. "I am not here to apologize," I said. "I am here to review the accounts." The air in the room shifted. They sensed the drop in pressure. They thought they were here to discipline a child. They did not realize they were sitting across from a creditor. I opened the folder and slid the first page out. The sound of the paper was the only noise. I held up the blown-up image of the receipt. "Item 4, I read aloud. private room deposit. $1,500. I looked up to meet my mother's eyes. I called the restaurant. They confirmed the Tuscany room for your anniversary. The one you said was canceled. The color drained from her face. My father suddenly found the pattern on the rug very interesting. Lauren looked at her parents. You said you weren't doing a party, Lauren said. She looked at our mother with a sudden, sharp confusion. My mother's eyes darted between the two of us. We didn't want to burden you, she stammered. We knew you were stressed about money, Madison. We didn't want you to feel obligated to buy a gift. I let out a short, dry laugh that sounded foreign. You didn't want me to feel obligated, so you just used my card instead. I picked up the second stack of papers from the table. This is the ghost ledger, I said. It was 5 pages long and single-spaced. It contained every cent I had bled for them over 5 years. Lauren's rent in 2019. Dad's DUI lawyer fees. Mom's mental health trips to Sedona. The phone bill I had been paying since I was 22. I looked at my father. His face went a deep, mottled red. You owe us? He growled. I don't owe you anything, I countered. I realized something tonight. I am not a daughter to you. I am a venture capitalist. I am the silent partner you go to for a bailout. I stood up and towered over them as they sat on my furniture. I have decided that this is a very bad investment. I am pulling all my funding. I pointed to the front door. Get out of my house right now and leave your keys. My mother tried to reach for my hand. Madison, let's just talk, she pleaded. We can work out a payment plan. I pulled my hand away as if her skin was burning hot. There is no payment plan. The account is officially closed. If you try to use those keys again, I will change the locks. If you harass me, I will take this spreadsheet to small claims court. I am done purchasing your love. It is too expensive. Slowly. My father stood up. He put his silver key on the coffee table. It clattered against the evidence of his greed. He did not look back as he walked toward the hallway. Lauren followed him in silence. She looked smaller without her sunglasses. My mother stayed for a moment. Her mouth working but no sound coming out. She finally turned and filed out after them. The door clicked shut with a heavy, final sound that echoed. The silence that followed was a receipt for a debt paid. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hands were perfectly steady. I looked at the manila folder left on the table. It was just paper now. It was no longer a source of anger. It was just data from a failed business venture. I felt a strange cold clarity. I was finally in the black. I was finally driving my own life. Jacob stepped out of the bedroom and took my hand. He squeezed it tight. I turned to him and whispered that we were going to Tokyo. We were not going to Italy like my mother wanted. I was going to fund my own desires for once. Then my phone lit up with a final notification. It was a bank alert. A new charge had just been attempted at the Monarch. They were trying to buy dessert on my dime. I stared at the bank alert on my screen. The Monarch had attempted a $500 charge for vintage port. They were still sitting at that table. They were trying to drain my account before I could block the card. I opened my banking app with a savage efficiency. With 3 taps, I froze every secondary card associated with my name. I felt a surge of cold triumph. The ATM was officially out of service for the Henderson family. I showed the screen to Jacob. He laughed, but the sound was short and sharp. They really think you are a bottomless pit, he said. I walked to the kitchen window and looked at the street. My father's car was still parked at the curb. They hadn't actually left the building. They were probably waiting for the manager to come back with a declined card. I felt a new wave of adrenaline. The final confrontation was not over yet. A frantic pounding started at my front door. It was not a polite knock. It was the desperate thud of someone losing their grip on a lifestyle. I looked through the peephole. My mother was back, her face twisted in a mask of panic. "Madison, open this door right now," she screamed. "The manager is threatening to call the police. You need to fix this error." I stepped away from the door and crossed my arms tight. I did not open the lock. I spoke through the wood in a voice like ice. "There is no error, Mother. I froze the accounts. You can explain the situation to the authorities yourselves." I heard her gasp, a wet sound of pure shock. "You would let us go to jail over a few drinks," she sobbed. I leaned my forehead against the door. "I would let you face the consequences of your own choices," I answered quietly. The hallway went silent for a long moment. Then I heard my father's muffled voice. He was arguing with someone. I looked at the doorbell camera on my phone. 2 security guards from the building were standing behind him. They had received complaints about the noise and the shouting. My father tried to bluster his way through it. He looked small and pathetic in the fisheye lens. The guards did not care about his former social standing. They led my parents away toward the service elevator. I watched the screen until the hallway was empty again. The digital ghost of my family had finally vanished. I went back to the living room and sat on the sofa. The manila folder was still there, but it looked like a relic from a past life. I picked it up and walked to the shredder. The machine whirred as it ate the 5 years of misery. The sun began to set over the city. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. I did not look like the daughter they wanted. I looked like a stranger to my own past. My phone buzzed one last time. It was a notification from a travel app. My tickets to Tokyo were confirmed. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of grief, followed by a deeper peace. I was finally debt-free. The price was everything, and it was worth it. The apartment felt cavernous once the shouting stopped. I stood by the shredder and watched the last sliver of the ghost ledger vanish. Jacob moved toward me with a quiet grace. He did not offer a hollow platitude about family. He simply placed a heavy ceramic mug of tea in my hand. The warmth seeped into my fingers and grounded me. My pulse finally slowed to a rhythmic thrum. I looked at the dark hallway. The space where they had stood felt permanently altered. I walked to my desk and opened my laptop to finalize the block on my shared accounts. My finger hovered over the confirmation button for the phone plan. This would disconnect my mother's line immediately. I knew she was likely using it to call a lawyer or a friend right now. I felt a momentary flick of the old guilt. It was a phantom limb of my former self. I clicked the button. The screen flashed a cold green success message. Their signal was gone. A soft chime echoed from the hallway. I froze and looked at the doorbell camera again. It was not my parents this time. A courier stood there holding a small, elegant box wrapped in gold foil. I opened the door and signed the electronic pad. The box was addressed to me from a boutique downtown. I opened the lid and found a pair of diamond earrings. A note fell out. "Thank you for the generous investment," it said. The handwriting belonged to Lauren. I stared at the jewelry and felt a wave of nausea. She had used the company credit card I helped her secure. The purchase was dated just 3 hours ago, while I was printing the audit. She was spending my future on vanity. The realization hit me like a physical blow. There was no bottom to their greed. They did not just want my money. They wanted to consume my very ability to survive. I handed the box to Jacob with trembling hands. "We need to check the business filings," Jacob said. He pulled up the public records for Lauren's brand. My name was listed as the primary guarantor for her commercial lease. I had signed the papers years ago when I still believed in her potential. If her brand failed, I was legally responsible for the remaining 3 years of rent. The total was nearly $60,000. This was the hidden snare my mother had kept in reserve. I felt the air leave my lungs. I called my lawyer on his private line. He listened as I explained the fraudulent charges and the guarantee. "We can contest the signature if she used your credit line for personal items," he said. "But the lease is a different beast entirely. You need a signed release from the landlord to walk away." I realized my mother had planned this escape route for Lauren months ago. They knew I was reaching my breaking point. They had built a financial cage around my freedom. I found the landlord's contact information in my old emails. I sent a brief message requesting an urgent meeting. I did not mention the family drama. I kept it strictly professional. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with a response. It was not from the landlord. It was a forwarded email from my mother. She had already contacted him. She told him I was mentally unstable and undergoing a crisis. She was trying to strip away my legal standing to manage my own affairs. The cruelty of the move was breathtaking. She wanted to frame my independence as a breakdown. I sat on the floor and leaned against the cold radiator. Jacob knelt beside me and took the phone away. "We will fight this with facts," he whispered. I looked at him and saw the fire in his eyes. I was not alone in the trenches. I stood up and walked back to the shredder. I had destroyed the history, but the future required a new weapon. I began to gather every text message and email Susan had sent me. I documented her demands for money alongside her claims of my instability. It was a mountain of evidence. I saw the patterns of a predator. She used my love as a hook and my guilt as a line. I was finally seeing the hook clearly. I drafted a formal cease and desist order. This was no longer a daughter talking to a mother. This was a victim reclaiming her life. I hit send on the draft to my lawyer. I felt the power shift one final time. I was no longer waiting for their permission to exist. I was taking it. I looked at the gold box on the counter. The earrings sparkled under the kitchen light. They were a trophy of a war I was finally winning. Tomorrow, I would meet the landlord with my lawyer and return the fraudulent earrings for a refund to my account. We would settle the arrears, sign the release form, and secure my safe deposit box with a new lock. I was no longer a daughter in their eyes, but I was finally a free woman. The leaves outside my window turned from green to gold, and then a brittle brown. It has been 3 months since the audit. My phone sits on the coffee table with a black, silent screen. For years, that silence would have felt like a terrifying punishment. I would have waited for the storm of guilt trips to begin. But now, the quiet feels like a receipt for a debt fully paid. It is peace. I finally understand that I was never the problem. I opened my banking app this morning while the coffee brewed. The numbers were higher than I had ever seen them. The monthly drain of phone bills and emergency loans had stopped. The money I had already lost was gone. But the thousands I would have blotted out over the next 5 years stayed in my account. I turned to Jacob and told him to book the flight. We are going to Tokyo because that is my choice. My resources are finally funding my own desires, not their delusions. I sat at my desk and opened the laptop one last time. I looked at the spreadsheet file named the Ghost Ledger. It was no longer a source of sharp anger or resentment. It was just data from a failed business venture that I had survived. I moved the file to the archive folder and clicked close. The screen went black and reflected my face. I looked tired, but I also looked free. The weight on my chest had completely vanished. I realized then that the cost of my freedom was high. I lost a mother, a father, and a sister in a single night. I lost the illusion of a family safety net. But looking around my quiet living room, I knew the price of staying would have been higher. I was no longer an ATM for people who treated me like a stranger. I was a person with a future. Jacob reached over and squeezed my hand. "We are ready." A single notification popped up on my laptop screen. It was an automated email from the county small claims court. My mother had filed a suit for emotional distress and unpaid rent. She was still trying to pull the lever on the machine. I did not panic or feel the urge to apologize. I simply forwarded the email to my lawyer and deleted it. She had no more coins to play with. The game was over for her. The apartment felt light and airy as I packed my suitcase. I realized that being the strong one was a lie I told to survive. I was never a martyr. I was just a woman who decided to stop being a victim. My wallet remained closed and my heart felt open. We walked out the door and I did not look back. The account is closed and the balance is 0. I am finally in the black. The world is quiet,